He never even knew my name, but now I'm carrying his child. The thought echoes in Sophie Bennett's mind as she sits alone in a quiet hospital waiting room, the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant beeping of monitors down the hall reminding her that life is moving forward whether she's ready or not. Her fingers curled tightly around the worn edges of a sketchbook resting on her lap, its pages filled with charcoal lines and half-finished dreams, one particular drawing pressed deeper than the others. A man in a tailored suit, his face captured from memory, strong jaw, distant eyes, the kind of man who belonged to glass towers and penthouse views, not to someone like her, and yet for one single night, their worlds collided, and everything changed, the memory pulling her back without warning to that evening when rain had fallen in slow, steady sheets over the city, blurring neon lights into streaks of gold and blue as Sophie hurried beneath the awning of a luxury hotel, clutching her portfolio against her chest, her shoes damp, and her dress clinging just slightly from the cold. She wasn't supposed to be there, not really, just another struggling artist hoping to deliver a last-minute commission piece for a client who never even showed up, but fate doesn't ask for permission, it just rearranges everything in a heartbeat, and that's when she heard her name, or at least, the name they thought was hers, a sharply dressed assistant mistaking her for someone else, ushering her through polished marble floors and past guests who didn't bother to look twice, into a world she had only ever seen through glass windows, a private gala where laughter was measured and every glance carried weight. Sophie barely had time to protest before she was standing face to face with him, Alexander Hayes, though she didn't know his name yet, only the quiet authority in the way the room seemed to bend around him, the subtle tension in his posture like a man used to control but tired of it. His eyes meeting hers not with recognition, but with something else, curiosity, maybe even relief, as if her presence solved a problem she didn't understand, and then he spoke, his voice low, steady, cutting through the noise with a single sentence that would rewrite the course of her life. Stay with me tonight, just until this is over, no promises, no expectations, just an arrangement born out of necessity and misunderstanding. Sophie hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, every instinct telling her she didn't belong. But something in his expression, something unguarded, almost human beneath the polished surface, made her stay, and neither of them could have known that. This one decision, this fleeting intersection of two completely different lives, would leave behind something neither money nor power could undo, something real, something permanent, something that would follow her all the way to this quiet hospital room, where the weight of that night now lived quietly beneath her heartbeat, waiting to be seen. The rain had not stopped that night, it only softened into a quiet rhythm against the tall glass windows of the suite, the kind of sound that made everything feel suspended between reality and something almost unreal, and Sophie stood there near the edge of the room, her damp shoes leaving faint marks on the polished floor, unsure of where to place herself in a space that felt worth more than her entire life combined, while Alexander Hayes moved with quiet precision, loosening his tie as if the weight of the evening had been pressing against his throat for hours, neither of them speaking at first, because sometimes silence says more than any introduction ever could, and when he finally looked at her again, there was something different in his gaze, less guarded, almost searching, as if he was trying to understand why she did not react the way others usually did around him. No nervous laughter, no calculated charm, just honesty, raw and unpolished, and Sophie felt it too, the strange absence of pretense, the way the world outside that room seemed to fade into nothing, leaving only two strangers standing on unfamiliar ground. He offered her a seat, not as a command but as a quiet invitation, and she accepted, placing her sketchbook carefully on the table between them like it was the only thing anchoring her to who she really was. He noticed it immediately, his fingers brushing lightly over the worn cover before pulling back, as if even that small gesture carried weight. "You draw?" he asked, his voice softer now, and Sophie nodded, explaining in simple words how she took small jobs wherever she could find them, portraits, logos, anything that paid enough to keep her going another week, and for the first time that evening, Alexander smiled. Not the practiced smile of a man used to negotiations, but something quieter. Something that did not belong to boardrooms or headlines, and as the minutes passed, conversation replaced hesitation, stories unfolding in fragments, hers about late nights and cheap meals and chasing something uncertain, his more guarded, speaking of responsibility without ever naming the cost, of expectations that never seemed to end, and somewhere between those words, the invisible line between them began to blur, not because they planned it, but because it simply happened, the kind of Connection that does not ask for permission, only for presence. And when the city lights dimmed beyond the glass and the world outside grew quieter, Sophie realized she had forgotten why she was supposed to leave, forgotten the fear that had followed her into that room, because in that moment, she was not the girl who did not belong, and he was not the untouchable man the world believed him to be. They were just two people sharing something real in a world that rarely allowed it, and yet even in that fragile space, time moved forward without waiting, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that moments like this never lasted, that morning would come, and with it, reality. But neither of them said it out loud, because some nights feel too rare to question, too important to interrupt, and so they stayed, not knowing that what they were building in silence would not disappear with the sunrise, but instead follow them long after they walked away, shaping choices neither of them were ready to face. Morning arrives quietly, not with noise but with light, pale and unforgiving as it slips through the floor-to-ceiling windows and stretches across the room, illuminating everything that felt distant just hours ago, and Sophie wakes slowly, the unfamiliar softness beneath her and the faint scent of cologne in the air reminding her where she is before her eyes even open. For a brief moment she forgets the difference between this world and hers, caught in that fragile space where last night still feels real, but then she turns slightly and notices the empty side of the room, the absence louder than any goodbye, the silence heavier than anything he could have said, and her chest tightens in a way she cannot quite explain, not because she expected something more, but because something about the way he left makes everything feel unfinished, like a sentence cut off in the middle. She sits up slowly, pulling the sheet around her shoulders as her gaze drifts across the room, searching without meaning to, until it lands on the table near the window where an envelope rests, perfectly placed, deliberate. And she already knows what it is before she even reaches for it, her fingers hesitating just for a second before opening it, the crisp sound of paper breaking the quiet. Inside is money, more than she has ever held at once, enough to solve problems that have been chasing her for months, maybe even longer, but instead of relief, something colder settles in her chest, something that feels a lot like being misunderstood, like being reduced to something simple when what happened was anything but that. And for a moment she just sits there, staring at it, replaying the night in fragments, the conversation, the way he looked at her like she was not invisible, the way it felt real in a way she had not expected, and now this, a transaction, clean and final, as if it all fit neatly into a box he could close and walk away from. And maybe that is exactly what he needed, maybe that is how his world works, everything controlled, everything resolved before it becomes complicated. Sophie exhales slowly, forcing herself to stand, to move, because staying in that room any longer feels like holding onto something that was never meant to stay. She gathers her things quietly, her sketchbook still resting where she left it, and when she picks it up, a loose page slips free, drifting to the floor. She bends down to retrieve it and freezes for a moment when she sees what she had drawn without even realizing it, his face, not perfect, not detailed, but unmistakably him, captured in a way that feels too honest, too personal, and she quickly folds it, sliding it back between the pages as if hiding it from herself. Then she glances once more at the envelope, her hand hovering before she finally closes it and leaves it exactly where it is, untouched, because some things are not meant to be priced, no matter how much they are worth. And without another look back, she walks toward the door, each step pulling her further away from that night, from him, from the version of herself that existed for just a few hours in a world that was never hers. And as the door clicks softly behind her, the hallway stretches out ahead, quiet and indifferent, just another path leading back to reality, to rent due notices and unfinished sketches and the weight of starting over again, except this time, something inside her has shifted, something small but undeniable, like a thread connecting her to a moment she cannot fully let go of, even if she tells herself she should, even if she knows that people like him do not look back. And yet, as she steps out into the cool morning air, the city already alive with movement and noise, she cannot shake the feeling that last night was not as simple as he made it seem. That somewhere beneath all that distance, there was something real. Something that did not end when he walked away, even if neither of them is ready to admit it yet. Days pass the way they always do in Sophie Bennett's world, measured not in comfort but in survival, each morning beginning with the same quiet calculation of what she can afford and what she must let go. The small studio she calls home barely large enough to stretch her arms without touching both walls, the heater unreliable, the paint peeling near the window where cold air slips through in thin, persistent drafts, but she adapts the way she always has, layering sweaters, skipping meals when necessary, telling herself it is temporary even when temporary has started to feel permanent, and yet something about her routine feels different now, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but inside, there is a quiet shift, like a note that no longer fits the melody. She finds herself pausing in the middle of sketches, her pencil hovering above the page as her thoughts drift back to that night without permission, to the way his voice sounded when it was not guarded, to the way he looked at her like she was more than background noise. And she hates that part of herself a little, the part that keeps replaying something that should have been simple, something that should have been easy to forget, but it is not, and that realization lingers longer than she wants it to, until one morning, everything changes in a way she cannot ignore. It starts small, almost nothing, a wave of dizziness while she stands in line for coffee she ends up not buying, a strange exhaustion that does not match the few hours she spent working the night before. She brushes it off at first, blaming it on stress, on lack of sleep, on everything except what it actually is, because some possibilities are too heavy to consider without proof, but the signs do not disappear, they return the next day, and the day after, more persistent, more undeniable, until finally she finds herself standing outside a small clinic 3 blocks from her apartment, her heart beating faster with each step as if it already knows what her mind is trying to avoid. The bell above the door chimes softly as she enters, the smell of antiseptic and quiet conversation filling the air, everything about the place ordinary, routine, as if moments like this happen every day for people who are not her. She sits, waits, answers questions she barely hears, her voice steady even as her thoughts are anything but, and when the nurse hands her the results, it feels like time slows down, like the world narrows to a single point that she cannot step away from. She stares at the paper longer than necessary, reading the same line again and again as if it might change, but it does not. It stays exactly the same, clear and undeniable, and suddenly everything inside her shifts all at once, the past weeks rearranging themselves into something new, something real, something that cannot be ignored or undone. She exhales slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the paper, not in panic, not in fear exactly, but in the weight of what this means, because this is not just a consequence, it is a connection, a living reminder of a night that was never supposed to last, and the question comes immediately after, sharp and unavoidable, what now? She could walk away, pretend it never happened, make a choice that erases everything before it begins, and for a brief second, she considers it, not out of weakness, but out of practicality, because her life is already unstable enough without adding something this permanent, this demanding. But then another thought follows, quieter but stronger, the memory of that night not as a mistake, but as something real, something that mattered even if he chose to reduce it to something transactional. And she closes her eyes for a moment, steadying herself before standing, the paper still in her hand, her decision not fully formed yet, but something inside her already shifting toward it, because no matter how complicated this becomes, she knows one thing for certain, she will not treat this the way he treated that envelope, something to be left behind and forgotten. And as she steps back out onto the street, the noise of the city rushing around her, louder than before, faster than before, she realizes that her life is no longer just hers to navigate, and whether he knows it or not, Alexander Hayes is now part of a story he never intended to write. The city feels louder after that day, as if every sound carries a reminder that nothing is the same anymore, and Sophie walks through it with a kind of quiet awareness she cannot turn off. Every passing car, every conversation, every flicker of movement around her somehow sharper, more real, because now there is something else within her that makes everything matter differently. She does not rush her decision, not because she is unsure, but because she understands the weight of it, and over the next few days she moves carefully through her routine, working small illustration gigs, skipping lunch to save money, sketching late into the night under a dim lamp that flickers when the wind pushes too hard against the window. But no matter how hard she tries to focus, her thoughts keep circling back to the same place, to him, not because she expects anything, but because the truth connects them whether he accepts it or not, and eventually the question she has been avoiding becomes impossible to ignore. Does he deserve to know? She sits on the edge of her narrow bed one evening, her sketchbook open beside her, the page blank for once, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper as she replays every moment she can remember, the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he left, and that last part lingers longer than anything else, because it tells her exactly what kind of world he lives in, a world where problems are solved quickly and quietly, where emotions are secondary to control, and she knows if she walks into that world, she risks being dismissed the same way again, reduced to something simple. Something convenient, and yet this is not about pride anymore. It is not even about him. It is about the life that now depends on her choices, and that realization settles something inside her, grounding her in a way she has not felt before. The next morning she wakes early, earlier than usual, the sky still pale and quiet as she stands in front of the small mirror in her apartment, studying her reflection as if searching for a version of herself she can trust to walk into a place that was never meant for her. She chooses her clothes carefully, nothing extravagant, just clean, simple, something that feels like her, because she refuses to pretend to be anyone else, not for him, not for anyone. And when she steps outside, the air is crisp, the kind that makes every breath feel sharper, more intentional, and she takes her time getting there, walking part of the way before catching a bus, watching the city shift around her from worn-down streets to polished avenues, until finally the building comes into view, tall, glass, impossible to ignore, the kind of place that does not just stand in the city but defines it. She pauses across the street, her heart beating faster now, not out of fear exactly, but out of awareness, because this is the moment where everything could change again, and for a second she considers turning back, choosing the easier path, the quieter one, but that thought fades almost as quickly as it comes, replaced by something steadier, something stronger. She crosses the street, each step deliberate, and pushes through the revolving doors into a world that feels just as distant as it did that night. Polished floors, controlled voices, people moving with purpose. And she feels the difference immediately, the way eyes linger just a second longer on her, the way she stands out without trying, but she does not shrink, she does not apologize for being there. Instead she walks forward, toward the reception desk, her voice calm when she speaks, even if her pulse is not, asking to see Alexander Hayes, not as a request, but as a statement of fact, because whether he is ready or not, this is no longer a story he can walk away from. And as she stands there, waiting, she realizes that for the first time since that night, she is not the one unsure of what comes next. The receptionist's smile is polite but measured, the kind that does not quite reach her eyes as she glances up at Sophie and then quickly back down at her screen, fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Do you have an appointment?" she asks, her tone professional, neutral, but Sophie can feel the unspoken assumption behind it, the quiet sorting of who belongs and who does not, and for a brief second, that old instinct returns, the urge to step back, to apologize for taking up space in a place like this, but she does not move. She steadies herself instead, her voice calm as she repeats, "I need to speak with Alexander Hayes," and something in the way she says it, not demanding but certain, shifts the moment just slightly, enough for the receptionist to pause, to study her a little more closely before finally nodding, picking up the phone and speaking in a lower voice, words Sophie cannot quite hear but can feel in the tension that follows. The minutes stretch longer than they should, each second marked by the quiet hum of the building, the distant echo of footsteps, the soft ding of elevators opening and closing, until finally the receptionist looks up again, this time with something different in her expression, something closer to curiosity. "You can go up," she says, gesturing toward the private elevators at the far end of the lobby, and Sophie thanks her softly before turning, her steps steady even as her pulse begins to quicken again. The elevator ride feels longer than it should, the numbers climbing one by one as the city falls away beneath her, glass and steel shrinking into patterns of light and movement, and when the doors finally open, she steps into a space that feels quieter, more controlled, the air almost still, like everything here is designed to eliminate chaos, a stark contrast to the world she came from. And at the end of the hallway, behind a set of dark wooden doors, she knows he is there, the thought alone enough to tighten something in her chest, but she does not hesitate. She walks forward and knocks, the sound firm but not loud. And for a moment, there is nothing, just silence stretching thin, until a voice from inside responds, calm, familiar, "Come in." And when she pushes the door open, the first thing she notices is the light, floor-to-ceiling windows casting a soft glow across the room, and then him, standing near his desk, his posture straight, composed, exactly as she remembers, and yet somehow more distant, more defined by the world around him. He looks up as she enters, his expression shifting from focus to something sharper, more alert, as if he is already assessing the situation before understanding it. Their eyes meet, and for a second, time seems to pause, not in the same way it did that night, but in a heavier, more complicated way, and she sees it immediately, the flicker of recognition that does not fully settle, the uncertainty behind it, as if he knows he should remember but cannot quite place her. And when he finally speaks, his voice is controlled, Neutral. Do I know you, or the words land harder than she expects, not because they are cruel, but because they confirm something she had tried not to think about, that for him, that night may not hold the same clarity it does for her, and Sophie feels it, the brief sting of being reduced to a question, to something unrecognized, but she does not let it show. Instead she steps forward, her gaze steady, her voice quiet but unwavering as she answers, "We met a few weeks ago." She pauses just long enough for the weight of it to settle, at the hotel, and this time, something shifts in his expression, something sharper, more focused, as memory begins to surface, not all at once, but in fragments, enough for him to understand that this is not just a random encounter, that this moment carries something he did not expect to face again. And as the silence between them deepens, heavier now with realization, Sophie knows that whatever happens next will not be simple, because this is no longer about a misunderstanding or a single night. This is about something real, something that cannot be undone, and whether he is ready or not, she is about to tell him the truth that will change everything. The shift in Alexander Hayes is subtle at first, barely noticeable unless someone is looking closely, but Sophie sees it, the way his posture straightens just a fraction more, the way his eyes narrow slightly as fragments of memory begin to settle into place, and then it happens, recognition, not complete, not detailed, but enough for him to understand exactly what she is referring to, and the air in the room changes instantly, becoming heavier, more controlled, as if he is already moving to contain whatever this moment might become. "I remember," he says finally, his voice even, but there is something behind it now, something guarded, calculating, and Sophie can feel the distance in it, the shift from uncertainty to defense, and for a brief second, she wonders if she should have prepared herself more for this, for the way he would retreat into the version of himself the world knows, but she does not step back. She does not soften what she came here to say, instead she holds his gaze, steady and direct, even as her heart begins to beat faster, because this is the moment that matters, the moment where everything changes from possibility to reality. "There is something you need to know," she says, her voice calm, controlled, but there is no hesitation in it, no room for misunderstanding, and Alexander watches her closely now, every instinct telling him that whatever comes next is not simple, that this is not just a conversation he can end with a decision or a transaction, and when she finally says it, the words are quiet, but they land with a weight that cannot be ignored. "I am pregnant." The silence that follows is immediate and absolute, stretching between them in a way that feels almost physical. And for the first time since she walked into that room, Alexander does not respond right away, his expression still unreadable, but his eyes flicker with something sharper, something that looks like disbelief, like calculation, like the rapid construction of a response before emotion has a chance to surface. "That is not possible," he says after a moment, not harsh, not raised, but firm, as if stating a fact rather than an opinion. And Sophie feels it, the expected resistance, the immediate need to deny something that does not fit into his controlled world, but she does not react defensively, she does not raise her voice or try to convince him with emotion. Instead she reaches into her bag and pulls out the folded paper from the clinic, placing it carefully on the desk between them, not as proof to win an argument, but as truth that does not need to be dressed up. "It is," she replies quietly, and Alexander's gaze drops to the paper, lingering there for a moment before lifting back to her, and this time, there is something else in his expression, something more complicated, but it is quickly overshadowed by something familiar, something colder. "If you are here for money, you could have handled this differently," he says, and the words, though controlled, cut deeper than anything he has said so far, not because they are unexpected, but because they reduce everything to the one thing she refused to accept that morning in the hotel room. And for a second, Sophie feels the sting of it, the frustration, the disappointment, but she does not let it turn into anger. Instead she straightens slightly, her voice steady, grounded in something far stronger than pride. "If I wanted money, I would have taken the envelope you left." The words land with quiet clarity, and for the first time, Alexander's composure shifts in a way he cannot fully hide, because that detail, that one small truth, does not fit the narrative he is trying to build, and the silence that follows is different now, no longer empty, but filled with something unresolved, something neither of them can easily dismiss. And as Sophie stands there, meeting his gaze without hesitation, she knows that this is no longer about convincing him of anything, it is about forcing him to confront something he cannot control, something real, something that will not disappear just because he chooses not to believe in it. Alexander does not speak right away, and that alone says more than anything he could have responded with, because for a man who always has control over every room he enters, silence is unfamiliar territory. His gaze shifts again to the paper on his desk, then back to Sophie, and something unsettled moves beneath the surface, something he is trying to push down, to reorganize into logic, into something he can manage. There are procedures for situations like this, he says finally, his tone returning to that measured calm, but now it feels forced, like a script he is reaching for instead of something genuine. We can arrange a private test, confirm everything, and then discuss what comes next. The words are precise, efficient, as if he is already reducing this to steps, to a process that can be handled quietly and quickly, and Sophie hears it clearly, the distance. The way he places space between himself and the reality standing right in front of him, and for a moment, she considers arguing, pushing back, demanding something more human, but she stops herself, because she realizes something important. She is not here to make him feel, she is here to tell the truth. What he does with it is his responsibility, not hers. You can do whatever you need to, she says, her voice steady. I am not here to convince you, and that answer seems to catch him off guard in a way he does not expect. Because it does not fit into the pattern he is used to, there is no desperation. No negotiation, no attempt to gain something from him, and that absence creates a space he cannot immediately fill. His eyes narrow slightly, studying her again, trying to understand what he missed, what he underestimated, but Sophie does not give him anything more than what she already has. She stands there, calm, grounded, completely certain of herself in a way that makes the imbalance between them feel less absolute than it did before. And for the first time since she walked in, Alexander hesitates, not outwardly, not in a way most people would notice, but it is there, a pause in the rhythm he usually controls so well. If this is true, he continues, slower now, more deliberate, then we will handle it properly, and the choice of words does not escape her. Handle it, as if this is something to be managed, contained, and Sophie feels the distance in that again, but she does not react, because she already expected it. Instead she nods once, acknowledging without agreeing, that is up to you, she replies, and then, before the conversation can circle into something else, something that pulls her back into his world on his terms, she steps back slightly, creating a physical distance that mirrors the emotional one he has maintained since she arrived. I just thought you should know, she adds, and there is something final in the way she says it, something that signals she is not asking for anything in return, and that, more than anything, shifts something in him, because it leaves him without leverage, without a clear role to play, and as she turns toward the door, ready to leave the same way she entered, without spectacle, without expectation, Alexander speaks again, this time without the same certainty. Wait, the word comes out quieter, less controlled, and Sophie pauses, not turning immediately, giving him just enough space to decide what he actually wants to say. But when she does look back, what she sees is not the composed executive from a moment ago, but something more uncertain, something closer to a man realizing that control might not be enough this time, and for a brief moment, neither of them speaks, because the truth has already been placed between them, and now it is no longer about whether it exists, but about what they are willing to do with it. Alexander's voice stops her, but it is not the word itself that makes Sophie pause, it is what comes after, or rather, what does not come after, the hesitation, the absence of a clear direction. And when she turns back fully this time, she sees it more clearly than before, the shift in him that no longer hides behind polished control, the uncertainty that does not belong in a man like him, and for a moment, neither of them speaks, because something has already changed in the space between them. Something that cannot be undone by logic or dismissed by distance. I do not want you to leave like this, he says finally, his voice quieter now, less measured, as if each word requires more thought than he is used to giving, and Sophie studies him for a second, not with hope, not with expectation, but with a calm awareness of what those words actually mean, because she has already seen how quickly he can retreat into control, and she will not mistake hesitation for understanding. Like what? She asks gently, not challenging, just clarifying, and Alexander exhales slowly, running a hand through his hair in a way that feels uncharacteristically unguarded, as if he is trying to find the right version of himself to respond with, the one that fits this moment. But for once, none of them come easily, like this being just information, he admits, and there is something honest in that, something that was not there before, and Sophie feels it, the difference, small but real, and it softens something in her, not enough to erase everything he said, but enough to recognize that he is no longer pretending. This is simple, it is not just information, she replies quietly, and her words do not carry pressure, they carry truth, the kind that does not need to be raised to be heard, and Alexander nods slightly, as if accepting something he has not fully processed yet, his gaze drifting again for a moment before returning to her. More focus now, more present, I need time to understand. This, he says, and for the first time, it does not sound like avoidance, it sounds like admission. And Sophie considers that, weighing it not against what she wants, but against what is real, and she finds that she can accept it, not because she trusts him completely, but because she trusts herself enough not to depend on his answer. Take the time you need, she says, and there is no bitterness in her voice, only clarity, but this is not something that waits forever, and the meaning behind it is simple, not a threat, not an ultimatum, just a boundary, and Alexander understands it. Immediately, the way his expression tightens just slightly before settling again, because for the first time, he is not the one setting the terms, and that realization lingers between them, quiet but significant, and after a moment, Sophie steps back once more, this time not to leave something unfinished, but to close what she came to do,